Great. Thanks, Ingrid. Thanks for having me back. Um, Hello, everybody. I'm Chuck Mills. I'm the Director of Engineering at the Asphalt Pavement Association of Michigan. So we represent the asphalt producers and pavers throughout the state of Michigan. Um, and we're excited to be able to take this opportunity to talk to you all about, asphalt issues. And this was one issue that was identified through our asphalt series last year through the questionnaires. So definitely fill out those questionnaires at the end of the presentations. That helps us put together what types of trainings we want to have. So today we're going to be talking about pre-production meetings. And really, I'm going to start out by talking about, here's my presentation outline. I'm going to start out by talking about ensuring a quality project. So kind of some general things about ensuring, a smooth quality project that we can get. We'll talk about attendees and roles for the pre-production meetings, what sort of discussion topics typically take place at these pre-production meetings, and we'll talk about coordination. So, and like Ingrid said, don't hesitate to type your questions in on the chat there, and we'll hit those as we're going. So really, when we're talking about ensuring a quality project, many aspects must come together. We've talked in the past here, the past year and a half on these asphalt seminars about asphalt design, pavement design. We've also talked about mix selection. So, those are types of things that happen before we put together a set of construction plans. So, once we figure out what we're going to do to the road, we need to put our plans together, and we need to, you put our specifications together as well. So those are some of the first things that happen before we even start a construction project. Some other things that happen, the contractor has to put together a mix design. Once they've got the job, they know what mixes they've got to make. They've got to look at, doing the quality control during the construction and look at what equipment and people are necessary to complete that project to ensure a quality project. And then the owner, their responsibility is to do quality assurance testing, inspection, and they have, people that are doing that. So when we're putting together our design plans and specifications, you know, one thing that I always like to talk about, and you've heard me talk about it, especially with our mixed design, is less is more. Less mixed designs, less variability, less yard space, less cost. You're going to have a more streamlined project and be more efficient and more consistent, which are all things that go along with this, um, ensuring a quality project. So we talk about a little bit about what the contractor has to do in ensuring a quality project. They put together a mixed design. We've talked about how those mixed designs get put together. We're combining many different aggregates and sands in order to meet those specifications that are specified for a particular mix. You can see here with the asphalt plant, there's many different piles of aggregates there. We have to proportion those and so that we can run them through the asphalt plant, make that mix in order to meet those specifications. There's a lot of quality control that goes into that. The producer is constantly testing those raw materials to find out the gradation and uh, the how much water, the moisture content in those things, so that as it's going through the plant, it's going to meet those specifications. And then while they're producing the mix, they're constantly, taking daily samples to make sure that that mix is meeting those specifications as well. We've also got, when we're placing the mix out on the road, there are quality control people out there checking the density, making sure that everything is set up properly on the paver. So you've got to have trained, skilled people out there. And all this is being done to ensure that we're meeting those specifications and that we're going to have a good quality project in the end. Now, I talked about the owner, they're responsible for the quality assurance testing. So they're taking samples out either in the field or at the plant, and testing those materials to make sure that they're, conforming with specifications. So they've got the quality assurance. They've also got inspectors out there on the job watching everything going. And so they've got to have trained and skilled people that know what they're looking at. Um, So really, all of this kind of comes together in putting together a quality project, and there's a lot that is involved with making sure that we're going to have a quality project. A typical like this slide here shows the HMA program. This is from the Michigan Department of Transportation. They do a lot of stuff with verification testing, verification of aggregate pits, verification testing of mixed designs as the material comes into their mixed design lab. They also do plant certifications, making sure that plants are certified and meeting all the specifications and are calibrated and things like that. Pre-production meetings, and we're going to talk a lot more about those, the specifics of those. But you can see that's part of the HMA program. Then you have the QC testing and the QA testing, that we've talked a little bit about here, and dispute resolution testing. And why is dispute resolution testing important? Well, it's really important because the way that we accept asphalt materials on a project is we're taking samples and testing those samples. So we're not testing every ton of mix that's out there. So it, a lot of the specifications are based on uh, probabilities and statistics and all that. So you've got certain amounts of tests that are taken to represent certain amounts of material. And everybody knows when you are testing and that there is some variability in testing in the test equipment, in the sampling equipment, all that stuff, variability can be introduced. So it's important to have that dispute resolution testing available in the specifications, because if our QC testing, we're going along paving the project and all our QC testing is coming in good, everything seems to be going good, and we get a QA test that comes back and shows there's a problem, then the dispute resolution testing can be a check. Okay, which one is right? If one set of tests is telling us one thing and another set is telling us something else. So that all working together kind of pushes us towards this, ensuring that we're having a quality project. So next we'll talk little more specifically about the pre-production meetings and who would typically attend these meetings and what their roles are. So from the owner's side or the owner's representative, if say it's a city job and there's not a city engineer who's going to be the project manager and they hire a consultant or something. So that's why it says owner slash representative. So it could be the owner of that project, or it could be um, somebody that's representing the owner. But you really want to have the project manager there. And typically a project manager is the person who's in charge. They're the one that are going to make the decisions on the specifications and things like that, and how they're going to get implemented for the project. Um, Really, it's the person who's in charge. They're going to make those final decisions. You have the samplers, the testers, the people that are actually going to be out there doing those sampling and the testing for that project. And then also like inspectors. If someone's going to be out there watching the construction happen, you want them at that pre-production meeting. And what their roles are at the pre-production meeting is to let everybody know who's going to be doing what on the project. Um, Obviously, if those things could change or there's multiple people, then you have multiple people there. But it's important to have the right people there that are going to be working on that project. Same thing for the contractor side, whoever the project manager is, and their samplers and testers on the QC side of things. Whoever the superintendent or foreman is, whoever's in charge of the crew out there, those are all good people to have at this meeting so that everybody knows where the chain of command is and who to talk to if an issue were to arise. We want to know, who's doing the sampling, who's doing the testing. What are we going to do with those test results? How how quickly are those going to be turned around? And when we get those test results, who do they go to? And that type of stuff. So it's really just all about communication. So then we can get into the discussion topics, and this kind of goes more details of what types of information is going to be covered and needed at these pre-production meetings. So we really want to look at any asphalt addendums or changes, if anything has changed in the plans or the specifications, between the time of bidding or anything like that. If any change orders, anything like that's happening on the project, and we know about those, bring those up at the pre-production meeting. Any random number sheets, if I know like the DOT does a lot of random number sheet generations for their random stratified test locations, and those are typically created and signed by both the owner and the contractor at the pre-production meeting.
Chuck, we got
Hey,
a
Ingrid,
question.
you got a question?
Yeah, we got a question in the chat. Do you have a pre-production meeting template, or is there one available like from MDOT, or do DOTs usually have one? Is there something that people can use?
MDOT has a checklist right in their HMA production manual, where it kind of goes through, all the different things. And it's really dependent. I mean, it's kind of their checklist is really set up for their specification,
Okay.
because each specification may be a little bit different. There might be different specifics that need to be covered. Um, but really, the big thing is just making sure that we have everything detailed, so that as any questions or things come up during the job, we know, okay, this was talked about at the pre-production meeting. We know here's where it is, and we need to talk to this person, or this person needs to talk to that person, and we'll get things figured out.
Okay. So yeah, if you're from another state, maybe check out what you've got. Your DOT may have something. MDOT's got the checklist, and you can use that as a jumping off point to make your
Yeah.
own that is tailored to whatever your project
Yep.
is.
And the random number sheets are kind of an MDOT specific thing on this example here, just because we use a PWL accepted specification. So we're taking tests every so many tons, and then how do we locate those within the mat? It's by a random number generation, and then you go offset and longitudinally and latitudinally or across the mat, and that's where we're taking our samples and things like that. So and then we do the same thing with our density cores. So we're actually drilling through the pavement to take density cores on DOT jobs. So they need those locations randomly generated as well.
Okay, good deal. And we do have a question for anybody who joined a little bit late after we did the announcement. We are going to email the slides out to everybody, and I will also drop them in the chat again. So I think that catches us up on all the questions.
Sounds good. Let's see. Okay. So the next thing on here on this list is a signed certification statement submitted by the contractor. So that's a thing, again, specific to MDOT, where they've got the contractor has certified that they're going to be using certified people. Their equipment's all been up to date and certified and all that. Plant location and certification status. So where's the mix coming from for this job? Which plant is it coming out of, and is that a certified plant? And then what HMA mixtures are we using on this job? What asphalt mixtures are we using? So specific to the project. So these pre-production meetings, are project specific. So that's how you'd want to have those. Next, you'd probably get into the quality control. And typically the contractor is going to supply a quality control plan. um, who the quality control plan administrator is, their contact information, who the foreman or superintendent is, and their contact information. Um, the QC plan is going to go over their sampling and testing methods and frequencies. How often are they taking samples and what are they testing for? Those types of things. That's all going to be laid out in that QC plan. Um, Also, what are their tolerances for that QC testing? And they're going to have action and suspension limits. So we typically have um, our specification limits. So the action and suspension limits are typically within those, inside of those. So if we get to a certain action limit, then we need to pause and look at something. Suspension limit, we need to stop and see if we need to like redesign our mix, or is there something happening that we need to take care of before we continue production. So and, those can be based on single tests or running averages. Just depends on their QC plan specific for that plant and those mixes that they're running. And then the QC plan is also going to talk about how they're going to document all this stuff. Because they want to keep track of all these test results so that if they have to make any adjustments or anything like that, they've got that in there. Also want to talk about timeframes. So obviously there are certain asphalt tests that are quicker to run and other ones that take a little longer to run. So what are the timeframes for test turnaround and things like that? So that will be listed in there as well. And then we move over to the owner's quality acceptance or the QA. Their owner QA plan is submitted as well. The QA plan administrator, the lead inspector contact information, the project manager, all that stuff will be listed in the QA plan. And again, sampling and testing methods and sampling and testing frequencies. You can see that the QC and the QA are very similar. They're kind of like parallel tests. So um, also the documentation, distribution of test results, and timeframes on the QA side of things. So that's all listed in that QA plan. Another discussion topic is binder content procedure. Binder content for asphalt mixtures is a very important thing. It's typically a pay item. So how are we going to check on the binder content? Are we using the ignition furnace or are we using vacuum extractions? And there are procedures that we have to do if we're using the ignition. We got to have correction factor samples. Those are usually supplied by the time the pre-production meeting's there so that we can get those correction factors figured out before we start production. Vacuum extraction, how many number of solvent washes are we typically doing to get to that asphalt content, and that information is shared back and forth. So got another question, Ingrid?
Yep, we got another question. Is there a checklist on what should be included in the QC plan?
There are, and MDOT has guidance on that as well, as far as what should be in the QC plan as well as the QA plan. They have a lot of good guidance, and it's all in the HMA production manual. Specifics on what should be covered, and that. Obviously, again, their stuff is slanted towards what their specification is, but some of the stuff that I've listed in here is kind of the general recommendations, and there's a lot more detail there for them for their specification.
All right, good deal. That's the only one we got at the moment.
Okay, thanks. So we got through the binder content procedure. Like I said, that's an important thing. Another thing, alternate acceptance methods. If there are, for this particular job, are there mixtures with small tonnages or hand patching areas? What are the sublot sizes going to be? Depending on how large of a project we have, we're going to talk about, what are our typical sublot sizes? How are we going to be accepting density? And what are our VI limits, visual inspection limits? There are certain limits of materials where you can just VI those materials. It's typically here in Michigan, if it's under 500 tons for the job, we can visually inspect those and not have to have a sample and a test result and all that kind of stuff. So, but these are all discussion topics. These are things that you want to make sure are clear before we get out on the job and start producing the mix and paving and accepting and paying on the mix and all that stuff. We want to make sure that all of that is clear. And then we want to talk about, suspension of production. Are there, and a lot of this is dependent on, the specification. Are there sublot RQL or rejectable quality limits or suspension limits in the specifications? If those are exceeded, then, that prompts having to suspend production. If there's lot pay below 50%, if there's visible pavement distresses or the QC plan is not being followed, that can all prompt the suspension of production. Now here, this is a little different than the QC plan suspension of production because that's the contractor stopping themselves because they're seeing something. This here could be, also it could be that, or it could also be, the QA results are coming back and something's not looking right. So there are rules within the specifications that could suspend production that way too. And then you might be looking at a job mix formula change. So when we're talking about mix designs previously, you have a job mix formula from a mix design that's a job specific, basically mix design. And if things are getting out of whack, our QC results are getting to the point where we need to suspend or our production, we may have to look at making some tweaks to those mix design. So we call those JMF changes. And then we also want to talk about, dispute resolution. So what are the time frames? How long do you have to, figure out, okay, I want to go to dispute resolution because there's, the QC results are showing one thing and the QA results are showing something else. So there's usually a time frame. Usually typically with the MDOT specifications, it's 2 weeks after you get the QA results, you can request doing a dispute resolution. So there's got to be a time frame there. If it's not spelled out in the specifications, it's a great discussion topic here at the pre-production meeting. So that way, everybody's on the same page of if you want to do a dispute resolution on this project, you should do it within this time frame. Typically, with the MDOT spec, the QC pay factor has to be higher than the QA pay factor in order to dispute something as well. And then if you do go to the dispute resolution, those test results replace the original QA test results. Yeah, Ingrid.
Yeah, so we got a question. Who tests the referee samples for local agency projects?
That's usually, if it's not in the specifications, it's typically an independent lab. So it wouldn't be either the QC lab or the QA lab who's testing on that job. Usually you want to send it to a separate lab. And with the local agency jobs, that would probably end up being like another consultant lab or somebody that you'd want to figure that out at the pre-production meeting, where those samples would go. Yeah. Because on MDOT projects, it goes to the central lab. That's their dispute lab. So, but that's not, obviously they can't be doing that for every job around the state.
Right.
So
right.
most specs will say it's got to be an independent lab. So,
Okay.
or a lab that both parties can agree to, and that can be figured out here at the pre-production meeting.
Perfect.
Then we get to the testing costs, and it's usually, who's going to pay for those dispute tests. And usually most specifications would say that, whoever's tested proved it out to be right, the other party's going to pay for those testing costs. But that's something else that if it's not spelled out in the specifications, talk about that at the pre-production meeting. Make sure that it's clear to everybody. And then there are, at the pre-production meeting, talk about construction items. how are we going to handle traffic control on the job? What are timings of the paving and things like that? How is the traffic control going to be all one thing, or is it going to be different? Is it going to be flagging during some operations, or closing the lane down? We detouring traffic, all that kind of stuff. Just discuss on how the flow of the project's going to go. Talk about, if we are using flagging, how is that going to work? How many flaggers should be out there? Stress the safety aspect of, having flag controlled traffic. If we've got milling on the job, what are we doing there? Time frames. Can we drive on the milled surface after we've milled before we pave? All those things we can discuss here at the pre-production meeting. We can talk about bond coat. Bond coat's a very important thing for when we're paving. So we want to talk about that and how we're going to do that. And that ties in sometimes with our traffic control and when we can bond coat and before we pave and things like that. So continuing on the construction items, talk about when the paving is going to happen. Talk about how the paving is going to happen, how we see it happening. Are there a lot of intersections or shoulders or things like that? What's the plan of sequencing for all the paving? And a lot of that has to do with some of the traffic control and things like that, and just the specifics of that job. So that's why it's a good thing to discuss that at the pre-production meeting. That way everyone's on the same page. Um, and then rolling, how many rollers we're going to have out there, what are the density specifications, how are we going to handle, you know, getting that density on the project and still maintaining traffic and things like that. And then, when are we going to start production? So any kind of construction items that you can think of, specific, these are more specific to the asphalt side of things. Not every job is just an asphalt job. Sometimes there's other considerations to take into as well. And you can talk about those too, how you're going to coordinate if you've got a bridge project as part of your job too, and things like that. Um, you can talk about all that stuff at the pre-production meeting. So really, it all comes down to the importance of having the pre-production meeting is so you got some coordination between the parties here. So really, it like I said, it takes both sides to get a good quality project, both the owner and the contractor. And what the pre-production meeting does for us, it sets those clear lines of communication. Who do I need to talk to if there's an issue? If I got a question about the specification or how we want to build this part of this job, who is it that I need to go and ask about that so that I can get an answer? Because when we're out building the project, it's hard when if you haven't had a pre-production meeting and you don't know exactly who to go to. You think you asked the right person, but then they have to go to somebody else to get the answer for sure. Then all that's really going to do is slow things down. So having those clear lines of communication and knowing who to talk to really is going to help with making that the quality project. So, and then having everybody there and they know their role on that project, that's going to help out as well. So, really, it gets down to that whole quality HMA program. You've got the right mix selected and designed, and you've got everybody on the same page. You're doing QC testing and QA testing, and as long as everything's going smoothly, that's great. And the pre-production meetings can be a big help to that, to make sure that you're off on the right foot. And during construction, you'll be able to keep it on that right path. So that's what I had. I don't know if there's any other questions, Ingrid. Kind of
Um,
a quick overview of pre-production meetings, but it was somewhat detailed as well.
yeah, we don't have any questions in the chat, but let me launch a poll question here.
Okay.
I'm just curious. This is a type in your answer kind of poll question. Um, I'm curious to see what people think about what could make their pre-production meetings more effective. What kind of maybe problems people are having, or maybe things that aren't getting addressed in the pre-production meeting. When we'll leave this open for a little bit, and if folks have other questions, go ahead and type them into the chat. But maybe that'll spark a little bit of thought for
Yeah,
folks.
a little bit of
Um,
conversation. I know
yeah,
I another thing I'd like to mention is, I had heard over the past couple of years from my members that on certain jobs, people don't even wanna have a pre-production meeting. And to me, that's crazy. I mean, it's just so important to know who the people are to talk to when something happens on a job. I mean, and to know, okay, here's the specifications. What does this mean? What does this mean? Specs aren't always written so that they're so clear. So having those clear lines of communication and everybody being on the same page on, you know, we're going to get our test results within 3 days, or we're going to get our test results in a week, or different things like that. Then you know what's going to happen, um, and you can share information and know who to share it with or get those answers. I think it just makes things go a lot smoother when we're
yeah,
all
having
told like
all of
that.
that laid out at the start of the project, when hopefully tempers are cool and
Yes.
nothing has gone wrong yet. Everybody is, excited about the project to start, as opposed to maybe when things have gone a little off track and we're maybe
Yes.
wanting to point fingers. I think it is important to have some of these things laid out ahead of time, so that everybody knows, everybody's on the same page, and you know what to expect, because a lot of times that is what makes people, it definitely escalates hot-headed people if there is uncertainty about things.
Yes, I can.
I think we did a presentation earlier in this week about difficult meetings, and that was one of the things, is trying to anticipate maybe some of that volatility that can happen in meetings.
Yeah.
So we got about 40, 50 answers for this. Let me end this poll and then I can share the results. I believe I can share the results. We will see. I guess I need to give me just a moment here, folks, and I will log into this. Log into the browser version of Zoom, because, that is the thing that you have to log into so many different things. But let me log into this browser version, and then I can share your answers. These are anonymous. We don't have when you answer these, so don't worry if you were angry about maybe one of your things are like, I would like my meetings to be more effective by having people be less frustrating, or if you typed in something a little spicy, I think we're still okay here. So give me just a second here. Um, for those of you who are maybe seasoned veterans for our these pre-production meetings, maybe if you have something in the chat, if you've got good advice for somebody who is new, I would be really curious to hear that as well. Because I think that is something I've always found, that our learning from our peers is oftentimes the best. And so that is
Yes.
partially why we have Chuck come and talk to us about this.
Yes, it's very important, and like I said, it's all about communication and in setting up those lines of communication, knowing who to talk to. That's the whole idea with these pre-production meetings. Go through the specs and go through how we're going to build the job, and make sure that it's clear to everybody.
Well, and
Because
I think especially if you've got specs that are maybe a little bit different, anytime you've got a project where it is not the same old, it's even more important
yes,
to have that.
yeah. And I think that's where a lot of times maybe some people have, we don't need to have a pre-production meeting. We had so and so pay for us last year on a job. Well, still, it's good to sit down, maybe this year there's someone new that they've got to go to, or, this particular job, there's some specifics. It's always good to have that face to face. You can write things down and people will remember then, instead of just, oh, assuming it'll be fine. And then when a problem comes up, it gets worse.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that is the having those things lined up beforehand is so much better. All right, let's see now. I think I have
Yes.
figured this out and I can share our results. Let me drag this window back over here. And not that one. Apologies, folks. This is what happens, when we've got a live webinar. And we went a little bit shorter than normal with our content today, which is not necessarily
Well, giving some people
bad.
back some of their lunchtime, that's all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. All right.
You
So
never
I
know
think
how
that
many
you guys,
questions we're gonna have either.
right, exactly. All right. I think that now you guys should be able to see maybe some of this information. I can make this a little bit bigger, maybe. We've got having the agenda template was one of the things that folks said was a helpful thing to have. When all the pending issues are raised and ironed out in the meeting, yeah, having that meeting so that you can talk about those things. When the details of who is going to do what and everyone is on the same page, when the specifications are supplied, and I think that that's also important, is making sure that there aren't those assumptions made about what specifications everybody is using. Like, we all know what is going to be being used.
Yeah.
Let's see what else. Everybody showing up and participating in the meeting, having the right people attend the meeting. Yes, I would say that that is also important. If you've got decision maker type folks, make sure that they are at the meeting, or everybody who's a stakeholder in this being at that meeting.
And if you have new people, if it's, I've done work with these guys before, but there's someone new, make sure you take them so that everybody knows, okay, this is a new person doing this, and here they are. So
For sure, especially those types of things. Even I think that this is a great opportunity if you've got new technicians or new engineers. Bring them along to this meeting just so that they get the sense, so that maybe the next time they can attend it by themselves, but they haven't just been thrown into the deep end. I know there have been definitely some times, I'm sure, Chuck, you've had this happen when you were a new engineer, where you get chucked into something right at the beginning of a project.
literally,
You don't know what is going on. You don't know anything about the project because you started 6 weeks ago at
yeah,
this job. Let's see what else. This is a great one, having everybody's contact information. Yes.
yes.
Named
There's
company's
typically a
contact
sign-in
info.
sheet and minutes that are produced, like when we have an MDOT or pre-production meeting. That's
I
part
love
of the
that, because I have
template.
also
So,
been in a situation where I was like,
who was
I
that again?
right, I have seen Bob twice on this job. I do not know what his phone number is, but he is the person that needs to weigh in on this right now.
Yes, yeah,
Does anybody have his number? Making sure the right people are there. And also, yeah, some people don't need to be involved too. Whittling that down to the crew of people that really are going to be stakeholders or day-to-day active on this.
yes,
Yeah, Ryan makes a great point in our chat here that pre-production meetings, they're not optional for MDOT local agency program projects, excuse me. So that is also, like, if you are doing a project that is a MDOT local agency program project here in Michigan, you are supposed to be having these meetings.
yes,
And I would also say, it's better to actually do the meeting rather than just rubber stamp that, like, yeah, we talked about it, especially if something in the future does not go well for you. Having those expectations communicated clearly, Preparing your team for the meeting. Let's see what else. Specific styles of managing project scopes for asphalt projects. Let's see, generally communication. With trail projects, we often have a concern about access. Oh, that's a great point. Along a narrow corridor and clarifying the pace of the production. That can get addressed in the meeting. I think in general, access to the site,
Yes.
even if it isn't a trail.
Yeah. Yeah, trails get even more complicated with access, especially because then you got to get into, well, how we're going to build it if we only got access at, certain points. And then you got to think about how am I getting the mix to the paver and things like that. So,
Yeah, another one, the um, pre-paving layout is another one. Having that at ready for that pre-production meeting, it would also be helpful. Let's see, what else do we got? Documentation, yeah, how things are gonna be documented. I think also how things are gonna be distributed within that, having that communication side of things too.
yeah.
Who all needs to be copied on any kind of communications that go out on things. Um, Layout again, the agenda. Oh yeah, making sure that people have the agenda for that meeting ahead of time so that they can submit any information ahead of time, or a couple of people have said that distributing that agenda prior to. And we do a class about effective meetings here at CTT, and that's one of the things is that having that agenda, don't send it out 45 minutes before the meeting, especially if you think that a bunch of people are traveling 2 hours to get there. They're going to get that email while they're driving in the car. They're not going to it's not going to be as effective as if you got them a little bit ahead of time. We got a comment in the chat about the doing virtual pre-production meetings and compiling project information ahead of time. It shortens the length of that meeting. Yeah, so instead of people having to hash out this stuff, having all of it ready ahead of time can make that meeting really short. I think that that's a good point, is that this doesn't have to be a 4-hour meeting. This
No,
could be pretty snappy, for
it's
sure.
just you gotta. It's just important to have it so that people know who are the right people to get to, and when we're gonna send things out, who to send them to. Certain, like you were saying, the test results need to go here. Then they should be out within these many days. All that stuff is clear. Um, and even though people think that, oh, we do it all the time, but it's still important to have on every job. And like you said, it's important. It's a requirement really on those local agency projects that, but it should be a requirement even on your local jobs that aren't let through MDOT LAP.
Yes,
It's just good
it's just a
practice.
good practice
Yeah.
regardless.
Yep.
Let's see if we got any other ones. Having the foreman present, yeah, sometimes folks get left off of these meetings that are important in that group.
Yes.
Ryan says that they have bi-weekly project status meetings with the contractor, and hold that pre-production meeting. That's a great point, because also, when you are doing paving on a project, that can affect other, um, maybe not paving related contractors, but it can affect other people on a project. Yeah, the recording for this will be distributed, and we are recording for, yes, we will definitely distribute that to folks. Let's see, what else do we got? Contract specifications for non-MDOT projects, ensuring projects, people with vested interest. Yeah, there's a lot of that. Having the plant operators attend, not just the higher ups at that meeting. Having the objectives spelled out clearly. Yeah, for any meeting, it's important to have, what is the goal of this meeting? What are we trying to accomplish by the end of this? So yeah, having that for sure. The specific issues for your project. Yeah, especially like we said, if there is anything that is a little bit different about this project that's non-standard, you definitely want to make sure that folks are aware of that. Let's see, I think that brings us to all of them. So I guess let me see. I'm just curious for our group here. I just launched a poll, it's a multiple choice one, about you guys, what our pre-production meetings, what kind of how many of you have done a pre-production meetings, like, or how often are you doing your pre-production meetings? Are you doing it on every single project that you do? more than 50% of them, less than 50% of them. Occasionally you're doing them, but maybe it's only like 10% of the projects you do, or if you are never doing them. And then I know some of you, maybe it's not applicable to what your work is. So I'm also kind of curious about that. Yeah, that's a good point, Sarah. Some attendees prefer a virtual meeting. Field personnel like to be in person. It's hard to balance both. It's also hard sometimes to do something that's a hybrid. Some people on Zoom, some people in person in a construction trailer. That isn't always a recipe for the best quality meeting. People can't hear and can't. It's hard for the people on Zoom to hear. Sometimes it's hard for the people in the room to hear if you just got a computer that you're trying to pipe the sound in from. All right. Let's see, we're going to end our poll and I will share the results. So there is about half, a little more than half of you are doing pre-production meetings on every single one of your projects. And then another almost 20% are doing it on more than 50%, but maybe not every time. So hopefully this webinar maybe convinced you that it is a good practice every time.
It doesn't have, like you said, it doesn't have to be a 2-hour long meeting. It can be a 15-minute to a half-hour long meeting, as long as you got the right people there and you discuss the right things and clarify and write down all these things that this is the way that's going to happen for this job. Then everybody can be on the same page and you're going to have that better opportunity of ensuring that we're getting a quality project here.
Yes, for
And
sure.
everything's going to run smooth.
Well, I'm going to put the survey link into the chat right now. So if you are interested in getting a certificate of attendance for today's session, that survey link, it's a SurveyMonkey link. It's in the chat right now, in the Zoom chat. If you fill that out, we will send you a certificate of attendance. It is an instant. It takes us a little bit of time to process that. So it'll probably be next week before you would get that. You also have the opportunity, it starts off with an evaluation of today's session, so you can tell us what you thought about today's session. You can also suggest other topics maybe that you would like to hear about. So we do have two more topics coming up here. One of them is about non-standard mixes, so things like trails and sport courts. And our other one, Chuck, what is that
Sampling
one about?
and
It's
testing.
Testing, yes.
Sampling and
Okay.
testing, yep. And that one's going to be April 20. I had a slide on that, but you're showing your screen now.
Oh yeah, I will give you back the ability to share your
Okay.
slides here. Let me do that. All right. You can share again.
Yeah, so I just have the lunch and learn series here. So yeah, April 29th is going to be the asphalt sampling and testing, and then May 7th is the non-standard asphalt, sport courts, trails, and more. We'll talk
Yes.
about all different types of asphalt mixes and specialty mixes and things like that, and the details on what makes them different and what we need to do to deal with them.
Yes. So if you're signed
Sampling
up
and
for today's
testing.
session, you're also signed up for those ones. Hopefully you'll also be able to join for those ones. We will record those ones as well, and we'll have the slides and a recording available afterwards. If like I said, if you've got a friend who you think would be interested in either one of those and you would like to get them signed up, you can send an email to ctt@mtu.edu. I can put that in the chat as well. And if you send that email to us, then we will be able to get them registered. So thank you guys so much for attending today's session. If you've grabbed that SurveyMonkey link and you filled it out and you didn't have any issues with it, you're free to go. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I will hang out here for a little while if you do have any problems. Again, thank you guys for joining us. We do appreciate it. And Chuck, thank you again for presenting. We always love to have you back. And
Thanks, Ingrid.
we are excited about these other 2 sessions that we're going to have here this spring.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Just reach
Awesome,
out if you have any questions on asphalt. That's what we're here for.
Yes, for sure. So yeah, that SurveyMonkey link is in the chat. If you grabbed it, you're free to go. Thanks so much. If you are attending with a couple of people, there is a question where you can all get a certificate of attendance as well. You got to fill in their names and emails and whatnot. If you're attending just by yourself, there's a question that asks, like, do you need to get certification for other people or something like that? You got to put the number 0 in, or else you cannot continue on with the survey. But thank you again, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. And Chuck, thank you for putting that flyer up because I was like, I'm blanking on what days those other sessions are.
No problem. That's
I
why I
was
put
like,
it at the end so I could pop that up
yes,
so we could talk
like
about
I
it.
remember that they are later in the month, but I do not remember exactly when.
Well, you have what, 3 or 4 of these every week, so
Yes, they start to run together a little bit.
yes.
So yeah, we'll leave the Zoom room open until a little after 1 o'clock, and then I'm going to shut things down. But let me know if you're having any problems with that survey link. And Chuck, if you need to jump off, you are also free to go. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ingrid. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye. All right, folks. Like I said, if you've got that SurveyMonkey link, then you're free to go. If you are having any issues, go ahead and type it in the chat and I will attempt to help you. Usually the troubleshooting is pretty easy. Thank you for attending from the Grand Canyon. I appreciate that you made the effort to attend, even though it's not a lunch and learn for you, like a coffee and learn maybe. All right, folks, I'm just gonna hang out while you guys are grabbing that SurveyMonkey link. If you grabbed it and you filled everything out and you got to the end, you are all set. Thanks so much, and we will catch you next time, hopefully. And if you are having any problems, please let me know and we'll address those. In the meantime, I am going to make sure that the slides get into the right folder so that they get sent out to you guys in an email, which again, it will take us a little bit to get those emails out, so don't expect it right away. Sure, I can definitely post the link again. There you are, Brock. And again, let me know, folks, if you're having any issues with that SurveyMonkey link. Sometimes it is bulky for people and they have some issues. So all right, folks, it looks like we're down to the last 30 or so of you that are still in the chat. I will leave the Zoom room open here until a couple minutes after 1, and I'll give you guys like a 60-second warning before I do close the room. Sure, Paul, if you submitted your survey and you got like routed back to our CTT webpage, then you're all good to go. Okay, good deal. Unfortunately, from my end, at the moment, I do not have a way to confirm, but if you got routed back to that webpage, then you're all set. And thank you again for attending. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend and good rest of your afternoon. All right, it looks like we're down under 30 folks that are still in the room. Again, I'll give you a 60-second warning before I close things up. All right, folks, looks like we're down to the last 20 or so of you. If you are having issues with that SurveyMonkey link, I will put it in the chat one more time here. Maybe. There we go. I'll put it in the chat one more time. So it is the most recent thing that's in the Zoom chat. It's the SurveyMonkey link. If you fill that out, then we will be able to issue you a certificate of attendance. If that isn't important to you, you can also just leave the room. I'm going to close things down in about a minute. So I will put a timer up on the screen here, and I think it chimes when we get to the end. So here's your last call for using the for grabbing that link out of the chat, and otherwise you're free to go for today's session, and hopefully we see you again in the future on one of our other sessions.